Really appreciate you guys taking some time to come together with me to go over some of the impacts that COVID has had. I am going to, give me 1 second here, make sure I can share my screen with you guys. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my screen. So on January 30th of 2020, the International Health Regulation Emergency Committee of the World Health Organization declared the outbreak a public health emergency of international concern. This was the start of a series of events that would forever shape 2020. Now let's fast forward to March of 2020. It was the beginning of spring. Birds were chirping, flowers were blooming. Spring was so promising of great new things. And then it hit. On March 11th, the World Health Organization announced and characterized COVID-19 as a pandemic. Suddenly, life as we knew it was drastically going to change. I mean, really, who in their right minds could have imagined waking up to this strange new world? A world where suddenly we are all now required to wear face masks, and businesses are forced to close their doors to help stop the spread. The hardest part personally is the uncertainty of how much longer this new norm will last and when can I go back to the old norm. I kind of liked it there. Now where an executive order is forcing us as a society to just stay home. Back in the day, my childhood stay-at-home executive order meant I was grounded. I could not watch TV or play with my friends. Well, thanks to streaming services, now I can watch all the TV I want, but I still can't go hang out with my friends. A 6-foot perimeter is now required between you and the person standing next to you in line. I don't really know about you, but that's a welcome space to me in any store. I just wish that the guidelines were not established under these same circumstances. I fully imagine hearing the tales of 2020. These tales will be similar to many other major events in history. We will be able to share with future generations the horror of running out of toilet paper. Instructions were everywhere to illustrate how we are all to properly wash our hands, which makes me kind of wonder what people were doing before that we needed all this instruction. And if you were lucky, you could find some hand sanitizer on the shelves at stores, which this shortage actually caused liquor distilleries to voluntarily halt production on liquor to meet the shortage of hand sanitizer. All kidding aside, business owners were forced to make some really tough immediate decisions. These decisions would now impact their future success or failure of their business. It would immediately impact their livelihood and affect that of all of their employees that work for them. So is it 2021 yet? 2020 seems like it is never ending. I lived in denial as long as possibly possible. But I've now been forced to move into a new level of acceptance of COVID-19. There's no precedence to refer what will dictate and how we will bounce back and get back to the way things should be. Essential workers were allowed to continue to work while so many others lost their jobs. People were forced to make tough decisions to help protect themselves as well as their families. Families with multi-generational households have this added fear of bringing this horrible disease back home to their loved ones. Recommendations are made to individuals with compromised immune systems to just stay home. The government reacted swiftly by shutting down life as we know it. I'm not touching on the facts that transpired or if it was even right or wrong. I can honestly say that I am very thankful that it was not my burden or my decision to make. I don't envy those people that were forced to make the call to protect everyone. Still today, the roadmap is very unclear. How does everyone get back to where they were before the pandemic hit? COVID-19 has wreaked so much havoc on our everyday life. Even the simple task of going to the grocery store has taken on an entirely new stress level. The worst realization is when you see your son in the grocery store with his mask on, and you swiftly approach this man to quickly say hello before he disappears into the next aisle, only to realize seconds before you grab him, wait a minute, that's not my son. I speak from experience, as I almost touched a total stranger's arm. Luckily for me, I had a fresh bottle of hand sanitizer in my purse to wipe off any possible cooties. Now I hesitate when I see someone in the store. I think, is that who I think it is? Do I give him a hug, an air hug, fist bump, a little kick? I really don't know. If you do see me, don't be surprised that I will approach you the same way that you're approaching me. Waiting, watching to see people's reactions is very intriguing to me. I ventured out to Walgreens not that long ago to pick up a few items. There was a young girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. She was all excited, jumping around, and hopped right in line behind me. Her parents yelled out to her, "Get back here and get away from her." I don't know who they startled more, me or her. It was as though I carried the plague, or something worse, like COVID-19. I can imagine that her childhood memories will include this strange new way to interact, where you are now actually fearful of the person standing next to you. She didn't hesitate to move beside me at the checkout line, but I'm pretty sure in the future she will. So what is the real full impact of COVID-19? Unfortunately, I do not believe that we have seen that full spectrum or what the long-term effects will be. So many people, myself included, have adapted and radically changed their habits. I've noticed that my own daily routine has shifted and evolved. Sometimes, I believe, beyond repair. I don't necessarily think that my husband is convinced it's for the best, but I don't foresee myself ever being able to go back. After an hour-long class, this really only scratches on the surface of the impact. There are so many things that we do not have a clear picture on, and we won't for many years. In this class, I will be reviewing the impact of insurance coverages to consumers during the COVID-19 pandemic. I will walk you through several lines of coverage to consider some of the challenges of the standard forms and the gaps that do exist, including such coverages as business interruption, workers' compensation, directors and officers, and cyber. I will also be addressing some of the ways our industry has evolved to meet the needs of consumers by attempting to adapt and amend coverages that are in place now. Coverages such as your personal auto policy. And what are some of the possible outcomes of what pandemic insurance will be in the future? I will emphasize how important the agent's role is in educating consumers in regards to what coverage enhancements that may be available to protect them and those that are not. Let's start off by looking at some of the impacts of this new norm. How are consumers impacted that elected to include business interruption coverage? Unfortunately, they are impacted the same way as those without this coverage. The COVID-19 pandemic is not what business interruption is intended to provide coverage for. Many business owners have had their entire businesses halted. Those companies that were fortunate enough to continue to be able to continue to work are now forced to look at each interaction, each transaction, in each facet of their everyday lives. At this moment of chaos, business owners have been forced to adapt and innovate creative ways to keep their businesses alive. Others, sadly, have been forced to make the tough decisions that have ended a dream. They have put everything into their businesses. And what is their responsibilities to their employees, vendors, customers, and families? What protections and coverages are intended as part of the insurance program? I think the consumer's expectations are pretty simple. They pay a premium, and they expect their insurance policy to offer protection for their business. Policyholders expect to be covered in the event of a loss. Sometimes that's where the details are a bit unclear and a little bit muddy. That is where we come into the picture as agents and brokers. Insurance contracts have evolved significantly since that first piece of paper was drafted. We have coverages built in with just a few exclusions, followed up by several endorsements. Of course, each document specifically alters what is covered and what is not. For example, if I had no insurance experience, I have expectations of business interruption, especially if I see it on my policy. I personally would argue that my business is severely interrupted by no actions of my own, so I should have coverage for this. I see it right here on my policy. That is what I expected, and that is what I wanted coverage for. Unfortunately, we as agents know that that is not the case. Coverage is not automatically afforded in all situations. The details of what triggers that coverage is the part that we as agents are responsible to fill in those blanks for our clients. With that in mind, not everyone elected to include business interruption as part of their insurance portfolio. There is no question that business owners have been impacted significantly by this pandemic. The impact was felt very differently by so many people, including those of us in this class. Some of you may have already had to consider these tough realizations of what this means to your business. For those of you that have not, I challenge you to put yourself into their shoes. What would you do if your business was interrupted and negatively affected by COVID-19? Business interruption is meant to cover a physical loss or damage to the insured's property. This typically excludes viral infections or communicable diseases, as there is not a physical loss or damage to the business property. The question being challenged is, could there be a physical loss if your business is exposed to COVID-19? That is the argument that is taking place. I'll let the lawyers hash that one out, but there are several court cases to date that have sided with the carriers. The ones that concern me the most are the ones that have sided with the policyholder. I fully expect those cases to go to appeals court, as this is not what was written in the policies. California Representative Mike Thompson proposed House Resolution 6494 that states insurance carriers should pay retroactively business interruption. And I quote, "To make available insurance coverages for business interruption due to viral pandemics, forced closure of business, mandatory evacuations, and public safety power shutoffs, and for other purposes." There are several immediate concerns with that proposition. First off, that's not what business interruption is intended to provide coverage for. There was no premium collected for this coverage, and it was not used in rating purposes. This is literally an attempt to rewrite the policy after a loss. Let's not look past the "and for other purposes." What would be the impact to carriers? How would the actuaries account for this after the fact? Assuming that they are able to account for it in the rating, would there be enough funds to cover this type of payout? The common prediction is that this type of coverage would bankrupt many carriers. The proposed bill would eliminate several exclusions that make up the original insurance contract to force payment. That is a scary precedent. Bottom line is that business interruption as we know it is not meant to respond to this type of event. There are several active court cases that are still deliberating this very matter. I would recommend watching the headlines, as these will greatly impact our insurance industry. It becomes the agent's responsibility to recommend and educate clients on what the policy covers and what options are available on an insurance policy. There are so many other ways that the pandemic has negatively impacted business owners. In addition to the businesses being forced to modify hours or close their doors, they are also being forced to modify how they conduct business. These shifts in operation may directly impact other types of coverages, such as workers' compensation. I think it goes without saying, but workers' comp is based on payroll. Layoffs and reduced hours were a guaranteed side effect of the shutdown. Let's think about the restaurant owner. They've been on a roller coaster. They are originally allowed to continue operations, but were required to only offer carry-out or delivery. Restaurants were then allowed to reopen to allow for limited seating inside. Not long after, they were forced to adapt one more time to provide only outdoor seating. Now, they can offer both with proper spacing, of course. So the first impact to workers' compensation is the payroll. This is not really a coverage issue, but it is a direct effect of COVID-19. Most restaurants have employees each day that rely on their jobs to provide for their families. Together as a team, they all contribute to the overall success of a restaurant. There are bussers, hostesses, bartenders, barbacks, expediters, dishwashers, to name a few. So what happens to all of those employees when there's no tables in the restaurant to take care of? Or only a few tables for them to take care of? The employees are sent home if there's no one for them to take care of. The hourly payroll rate may vary from the server to the other staff, but it is still an expense to pay the workers' compensation. We must acknowledge that revenue was greatly impacted by this shutdown. Estimated payrolls were based on an annual payroll pre-pandemic. Mid-pandemic, employers are trying to plan ahead to ensure that they are still able to sustain their business post-pandemic. Decreasing payrolls may be an option. However, this is a band-aid to a much bigger issue because not all employees went back to work. Restaurants struggled to bring their staff back. These challenges left many business owners struggling to find qualified people to fill the shifts. There were many reasons that they did not return. As restaurants partially opened and closed, they were forced to account for the limited seating available. There is a concern for employees to protect their employees from consumers and their consumers from employees. Business owners have an obligation and a responsibility to provide a safe work environment for their employees. There is an expectation to provide the necessary personal protective gear. Shield guards, face masks, and protocols need to be available for their staff. People went crazy. Business owners struggled to find the required equipment to provide for their employees. Limited supplies caused a buying frenzy. Employers must make sure that there is enough equipment to properly clean and disinfect the workspace to ensure their employees are safe. There are so many resources available to guide and support businesses. It's very easy to get lost in that shuffle. So if you need resources for workers' compensation, I would recommend going to your carriers to look to see what they have outlined for their policyholders. Their websites include many helpful links, such as the Center for Disease Control, guides to prevent the spread, and tips to clean and disinfect the workplace. There are also guides to ensure that policyholders have the resources in case there is an infection. I don't go out often these days. However, one particular restaurant really stood out. Before I could be sat, the waitress asked me for my phone number. I thought she was sending me away and was going to text me when my table was available. She then said, "Follow me," and proceeded to take me to a table. I commented how surprised I was that she asked, because no other restaurant had, and the hostess explained that they want to make sure if there is an issue, that they know I was there. She also casually mentioned that some people had given her a hard time for even asking, which is pretty disheartening, as she was just trying to do her job. This form of contact tracing took just a moment, just in case. The restaurant decided to add to their protocol, to add this extra level of responsibility to their employees and patrons. I thought it was pretty smart. So the big question that comes to mind of employers in regards to workers' comp is, if an employee gets sick on the job, would workers' compensation take care of them? Workers' compensation is intended to cover bodily injury, which typically does not cover the flu, colds, or infectious diseases. But what about the healthcare worker or first responders? They are working on the front lines to take care of people that are sick. This hazard is a reality of their type of job, and there may be some additional protection for employees. Coverage is extended for injuries that have arisen out of or in the course of employment. So the questions to consider become, did they get sick on the job? Can you prove that it was contracted at work? And were there conditions in their work environment that led to the contamination? Coverage may be afforded depending on the circumstances. Besides becoming infected, another workers' compensation concern of COVID-19 relates directly to the new work-at-home environment. How have workers adapted to now working from home? Not everyone has a desk dedicated to their workspace at home. Common injuries may include injuries to the neck, back, carpal tunnel. People are working in unusual and unconventional spots in their home. It could be on their couch with their feet up, on a chair with TV table set up, or they may set up every day in the dining room. Workstations that were previously set up in an office environment no longer exist. The question to ask, are their employees' workstations set up ergonomically correct to prevent injuries? There is not always an expert on hand to come in and make sure that employees are set up properly to work from home. So make sure that they have the tools that they need to stay healthy. The resources from your carriers to help minimize the impact to workers' compensation by COVID-19 are available, so I would recommend checking on their websites. Excuse me, because I'm talking too much. Other areas that may be impacted include directors and officers coverage. This type of coverage has experienced a hardening of the marketplace in the last couple of years prior to COVID-19. The shift in the market has caused carriers to limit their appetite for new risks and increase underwriting requirements. Claim frequency and severity have made many carriers reconsider the type of risks that they are willing to now accept. A pandemic makes this even more challenging than normal. This challenge includes profit and nonprofit organizations alike. While their scope is different, they must all still determine the terms of which they are allowed to conduct business. Directors and officers are responsible and in charge of determining the best way to serve their organization. Technology has significantly evolved to allow us to meet virtually. Software developers have added layers of security to give us the confidence that we are secure and able to conduct business on their platforms. Even with the advancements and the increased security, not all organizations have embraced the new technology. Bylaws were created to outline those responsibilities and the terms and conditions that dictate the way officers can conduct official business. I think it goes without saying the expectation for directors and officers is to act in the best interest of the organization that they represent. The pandemic has caused several issues with these. Organizations not being able to meet in person. Even as everything has begun to shift to online or virtual meetings, communication can still be quite challenging. Some bylaws contain stipulations that dictate the requirements for in-person meetings only to conduct official business. This may be a critical moment if organizations do not adapt. Some organizations have adapted the rules to account for this new norm. Along with restrictions from bylaws, some nonprofits are experiencing decreased participation. This may include limitations on their ability to vote in new officers for an upcoming term without a quorum. Organizations are being forced to adapt by such measures such as extending terms for existing officers, which makes me wonder what additional exposures those directors and officers are actually exposing themselves to by modifying the terms of the bylaws without an official membership vote. Special amendments may be required to account for this new environment. There is unfortunately not an expiration date on a pandemic. Directors and officers for a corporation may have a different responsibility that can impact the day-to-day operations. Their responsibility to their investors looks very different than that of a nonprofit organization. So I'm curious to see what potential lawsuits may arise from investors on losses that are incurred during the pandemic. Investors may have a significant loss to how the directors and officers handle the day-to-day operations during this time. Did the directors and officers breach their fiduciary responsibilities? This will be a concern that may trigger coverage and will be a major consideration in determining if coverage is in fact available. Even if there is not a breach, the carriers would have a duty to defend the directors and officers. This unknown element added to an already tough marketplace, we have not seen the full impact of what it will be for directors and officers. Talk with your clients on what their concerns are and I recommend that they seek legal counsel when in doubt to make sure that they are taking the best course of action for the organizations before a loss. When I think about the impact of COVID-19 on insurance, immediately the insurance professional in me looks for all the angles and all the issues that may arise. The internet has radically altered life as we know it. Some may remember the days of dial-up where you heard the sounds of the internet actually coming to life. It was familiar and exciting. And in a whopping 10 to 20 minutes, we could check to see if we had a new email. With this great invention came a new way to steal information. Cyber coverage was born out of necessity.
I didn't understand that.
My watch is talking to me, Bixby, which is another sign of cyber things that can happen. But in a matter of days, in March, many employers transitioned their employees to work from home environment. So what's the worst thing that can happen via the World Wide Web? Well, first off, the bad guy can get into all of the remote employees' computers, steal all the confidential data, and wreak havoc with sensitive information. A record number of employees were deployed to work from home. Does that increase the possibility of cyber breaches? Of course it can. People must be diligent in protecting the property of their employers and clients alike. I must note here that not all industries were able to adapt the same way. This does not mean that there is not a cyber risk, just a modified version. The wonderful invention of the smartphone has given us so many ways to transmit personal data. Even if your clients are using their smartphone or work computers to transact business, they are still at risk. Thieves are just waiting for that right moment. Phishing emails may look innocent enough, and with a simple click of a mouse on a hyperlink, it can cause major problems. So what can possibly go wrong? In the right hands, data can be used for all types of bad things. Companies were forced to move quickly to limit the disruption to their businesses. As soon as thieves realized there was an opportunity, they were attempting to take advantage of the situation. The cyber risk can go quickly as business owners have adapted operations to account for COVID, increase their exposure with modified procedures, and employees now working from home. Unfortunately, criminals were trying to pry their way into work computers way before the pandemic hit. And I'm pretty sure it's going to last long after. They were already actively trying to breach and get into all of the remote computers. In fact, that one guy, that widowed, terminally ill guy, keeps emailing me. He heard of the valuable work that I'm doing and has reached out to me right away so he can leave me millions of dollars. All he needs from me is to give him my bank account information so he can deposit the money, my date of birth, and my social security number. Just a few little details. Employee training can be so critical to make sure that they all understand their responsibilities and what protocols are needed to protect the data that is now in their homes. Cyber coverage on the business side is to protect the third party. There can be added coverages built in to help cover the expenses to notify consumers, customers, and vendors that their data has been compromised. Cyber coverage on the personal line side is to protect the named insured. So what happens when those lines are blurred? I would make sure that your clients are aware of the risks, especially if they have employees working remotely. It's important to make sure that employees know how to protect that information and personal data, including what to do if it is compromised. Now, what are we to do to move forward? There are several ways that carriers have changed coverages to adapt to this new normal environment. Personal auto policies have adapted a couple of ways. Carriers have made modifications to insurance rates to account for limited usage, as we are now required to stay home. The stay-at-home order changed the number of vehicles on the road. It also helped eliminate rush hour traffic on the streets of New Mexico. It had a direct impact on the number of accidents. Policyholders believe they deserve a refund since they're driving less. The new question has become, I heard to reach out to my agent to see what discount is available to me since I'm not driving as much. Consumers are trying to educate themselves to find out what options are available to them from their personal insurance carrier. On a positive note, now more than ever, policyholders are looking closely at their policies. They are questioning the why and what everything means on their policy. The frenzy to reduce rates was started by a single carrier. They advertised that they were doing the right thing for their clients. The Department of Insurance issued a bulletin to carriers advising that they need to review their rates and confirm that they are not overcharging for rates during the pandemic, in a way forcing other carriers to follow suit. The responses did vary by carrier. Some carriers offered a flat refund, while others offered a percentage of premiums for a specific term. Honestly, to my surprise, not all carriers responded and held firm in the fact that they are not overcharging for insurance rates. While it is a hard conversation to have with a client, I can understand why they responded the way that they did. Vehicle usage can change for those that were previously commuting or driving for business use to pleasure use. That is an active thing that you can do to help alleviate some of those premiums. On the other side, there's a scenario of those that saw an opportunity for food delivery. They saw this as an opportunity to earn some extra income. Restaurants now are offering takeout and delivery, which spiked the need for new drivers. people signed up to deliver for several agencies, such as Uber Eats, Grubhub, to name a few. Food delivery skyrocketed as a new option and needed drivers for the amped up delivery. But unfortunately, there is an exclusion built into the standard auto policy that does not allow for food delivery. Carriers acknowledged that this was a need for their policyholders and temporarily removed the exclusion on the personal auto policy. This was a temporary fix. The temporary removal of this exclusion was not issued by all carriers. I would highly recommend checking with your auto carriers prior to starting those discussions with your clients. This can be a major issue if your client is delivering food and there's an exclusion on the policy. Communication can be really important with consumers before a loss happens, because consumers are relying on your expertise. So I would recommend having that conversation before a loss, because you're not the first one that they call when they start doing this food delivery service. So make sure you're having conversations with your clients to protect them. When was the last time that you offered pandemic insurance for a special event or protect business? I can honestly say I've never even considered this in my 20+ year insurance career. A level of this coverage is already available to consumers. The prime example being Wimbledon. The All England Lawn Tennis Association purchased this valuable coverage after the SARS outbreak in 2003. And when they were forced to cancel Wimbledon 2020, their coverage was triggered. The cost to put on this type of event is in the millions. Even with a payout of $142 million, that was not enough to recoup the costs that was paid out for this tournament. Current policies, as we now know them, were impacted following the SARS outbreak and the swine flu outbreak. That was the moment when exclusions were added to account for this unpredictable type of loss. These are the moments that our industry has evolved. The coverage exists, however, it is not available and priced for the average consumer. Coverage as it exists now does not address the full spectrum of the loss to a small business owner or even a regular business owner. It's not meant for the masses. So the biggest question is, what products will be available after the pandemic? How will pricing be determined going forward, and will additional carriers be willing to provide this type of coverage? Will the government intervene? The adaptation may be shaped by 2020 the same way that 9/11 inspired the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act, or TRIA. This was signed into law by President George W. Bush on November 26, 2002. Pandemic insurance is going to evolve in time. There is not a quick fix on the horizon. It's not affordable to the average business owner, and it's not realistic. We will all have to watch as the future of this new need will evolve the future of pandemic insurance. Now, where does that leave us? The duty to clients is not one to take lightly. We are all bound by the contractual agreements of the policies that are offered by carriers that we represent. It's very important to relay the types of coverage that are available and what will our clients get in exchange for that premium that they're paying. It's okay to let them tell you that's not their concern or they do not want it. There are some gaps in coverage that can be solved by adding a simple endorsement, such as the food delivery endorsement. That is, of course, if the carrier offers that type of coverage, because not all do. Other coverage concerns that can be addressed by providing resources from our carriers to the clients. When situations arise, Ask the questions of your carriers to help provide those best choices for your clients. We're in charge with predicting the unexpected, banking that that tragedy or that loss is not going to occur. We can problem solve with clients, but the pandemic is not over. Unfortunately, we cannot turn back the clocks to 2019 to strategize on how to combat the events of the year 2020. Business interruption is a solution for a physical loss, but it's not a good option for a pandemic. Lawyers are still trying to convince the courts that there was a physical loss. And I believe that they'll continue to do that until they get the results that they're looking for. I think fortunately on our side is the contracts, the actual insurance policy. I think that's something that's going to play a large part, or at least I hope, in the outcome of these cases. I expect that these proceedings will continue in the near future, and the outcome is definitely something that we're going to want to watch as an industry. Workers' compensation is meant to address bodily injury, but not a good solution for COVID-19 type of outbreak, unless it's directly related to their job. Other impacts to workers' compensation may include injuries sustained while working remotely. The overall impact from COVID-19 to directors and officers is still uncertain. The impact will be very different from for-profit, and to nonprofit organizations. However, open communication can be key. Cyber diligence is always a good practice to protect employers, employees, vendors, and customers. At the first sight of a breach or a concern, procedures are so important to have into place. So I would make sure for your own staff, for your employee or your businesses that you represent, for your individuals that you may represent, make sure that they know what those procedures should look like. Personal auto policies, they were temporarily modified to decrease premiums and adapt to the needs of policyholders. The temporary changes need to be relayed to consumers so that we make sure that they understand this is not a permanent solution. Pandemic insurance, it will continue to evolve to meet the needs of consumers. So what and how will the upcoming year, what and how the upcoming years will look like is still unknown. As of today, in New Mexico, there is 27,987 positive cases, in addition to 857 deaths, well, including 857 deaths. That is in addition to 10,167 positive cases on the Navajo Nation and 551 deaths. That is 1,408 deaths too many. There is no magical fix that's going to fix the damage that COVID-19 has brought to 2020. There's no quick remedy to restore the damage experienced by families and business owners alike. My main goal is to share some of the impacts and gaps in coverage during the pandemic. So I hope you did find value in this class. Now, I don't know if we have any questions or any other situations that perhaps I didn't consider that there are out there. And I don't know if Consuelo has control of that or if I do, but I don't see any questions in there. Well, I do really appreciate your time, and I hope that you do have a wonderful rest of your day, that you and your family stay safe and healthy. If there are any, let's see, we have some chats here. One of the questions that came up is, are there any references that you can mention? References as far as finding resources? Yes. So on the workers' compensation side, I did look at a couple of our key partners and pulled some of their information on. So I can definitely share those with Consuelo to send out to the group on those links. But I do recommend taking a look at your actual carriers. The ones that I particularly looked at, I did look at New Mexico Mutual. I did look at Mountain States. I did look at Safeco. So a lot of our carriers have these, they have references out there. It's a matter of looking them up. So definitely their carrier is the best first place, and I would recommend looking there first. So if they have their insurance, for example, with Safeco, I would look at Safeco's website to find out what was on there. Same thing with EMC, a lot of the other carriers that are out there.
That's great, Vivian. And also, just so that you all know, the Big I National has so much information, which you can go to your website, go to the national website and go to the virtual university, or even if you search, they have a pretty good search engine. And if you have a question on business interruption, it'll take you to all the latest articles. A lot of the information is what they're still doing on Capitol Hill right now, as we speak, in, trying to protect us from the business interruption issues as well as the workers' compensation issues. So go to your national website, log in, search for whatever questions you have. There's articles that you can use with your clients. A lot of great information. So, and call our office because we can guide you to resources as well. Shoot us an email and say, hey, can you find me an article on workers' comp, or what's the latest on business interruption? And we're happy to do that. Vivian, thank you so much. That was very informative. Really appreciate it. And again, thank you all for being here. Thank you to our silver sponsors. And everybody now is going to need to log out and log back in right at 11 o'clock. So again, you don't miss your gift card participation. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.